Hey friends, it's Rick Miller, and this is
Xing the Gap.
In this episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Kenneth Montague and Emilie Croning. Kenneth is an art collector and the founder of Wedge Curatorial Projects, a nonprofit organization that supports African and Diasporic artists. He's also a dentist, but more on that dual life later. Emilie's a curator, artist, and art historian of Jamaican and Lebanese descent who digs into the intersections of feminist theories, post-colonialism, and criticism. She's not a dentist, but she does work with Kenneth on Wedge Curatorial Projects and manages his private Wedge Collection. As a Boomer-GenX-Millennial trio, we dig into straddling the US-Canada border, choosing dentistry over music, James Van Der Zee's photography, appreciating versus appropriating, pushing for black art collectors, lifting as you rise, co-opting the Canadian flag, the cycles of rights movements, the transformative power of art, and the slap heard round the world.
It's very personal for me. Strangely, I'm actually related to Jada through marriage. My cousin married her auntie. Come on. Yeah. I remember a young Jada, years ago. So I feel very disappointed about the whole thing.
Listen on, friends. You won't be disappointed.
Xing the Gap.
Kenneth and Emilie, welcome to Xing the Gap.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, exciting.
Kenneth, you were recommended by Bruce Kouroubara, who's, someone who I admire a lot, and he suggested you should talk to this guy. And I had not heard of you because I don't know everything and I don't know everyone, but it was such a wonderful discovery. And then you led me to Emilie. So with that as a preface, I'd love it if the two of you could give just the short version of who you are, how you got here, what you do, which is a lot of information, but why don't you say it in your words instead of me reading a bunch of bio stuff. So Emilie, why don't you start?
Oh, okay. I'm used to kind of starting.
I like flipping things around, Emilie.
Yeah. Well, right now in this moment, I'm an independent curator and art historian, researcher, artist in my own right. Since I was little, I was always the artsy friend. So it was only fitting that I followed that path. I'm from Toronto, born here, raised between Toronto and the United States. Then I did my undergrad in Montreal, where I was able to still, stay in the French-speaking environment. So I did my undergrad in art history and visual art. And yeah, I was really longing to come home, which, for me is Toronto. And I ended up, the stars kind of aligned and I was doing an internship for my last credit. And that internship was with Wedge Curatorial Projects. So that's how I met Kenneth and the rest is history. I've been with Wedge and working with Kenneth I just celebrated 5 years. So we're at like 5.5 now, but
amazing. Yeah. And I guess that's a good pass the baton off to Kenneth.
Yeah. Well, it's Kenneth Montague. I'm actually a dentist in Toronto, but I also am an art collector and I am the founding director of Wedge Curatorial Projects, which is a nonprofit arts organization with a mandate to sort of promote and lift Black artists up into the world. And so I am a guy who grew up in Windsor, Ontario, which is across from Detroit, Michigan. It's the southernmost Canadian city. And it's a really interesting place to grow up because, you have a lot of American media, TV, and radio. And, I grew up in a Jamaican household. Both parents were early immigrants from Jamaica to Canada before the Pierre Trudeau years. Probably got here in the 50s. And I was born in the 60s, so I'm in my 50s now. So it's a lot of living. And half of that living was in Windsor, where, again, I kind of loved music and was playing in bands and got into the School of Music at McGill University in Canada and in Montreal. And then the band I was playing in got picked up as a record contract, and I got into dental school in the same week. All of this happened. This was convergence. But being a good immigrant son, I chose dental school. And I can play in a band later. I can have a record contract later. I'll just be a dentist for a while. Yeah.
This was to please your parents, or was it to please yourself? What is this?
Well, I think it was mostly parents at that time. My heart was on music. But as it turned out, I have a dental practice full of musicians entertainment people, designers, a lot of artists. And it's ended up being that I found my way in the art ecosystem as a collector, not an artist or a curator or a musician as I might have been. And it's been a really, really enriching experience. I don't know what to tell you other than that I've gained a lot. And it's been an exciting thing to actually feel like you're making a difference with something. I think being in the position of being a dentist who collects art gives you a certain, not edge, but people sort of say, okay, he knows how to run a business. We'll take him seriously. There's a lot of flippiness in the art world. And my odd thing of being a dentist has actually been a very positive thing in terms of my place in the art ecosystem.
Okay, thank you, both of you, for that. But I'll tell you a story about my own background as well. I also studied at McGill. I studied architecture. I have 2 degrees in architecture, hence my connection to Bruce Kourbara and KPMB. But for me, I graduated and then told my mom after my 2 degrees that I was going to play Murder Number 2 in a production of Macbeth and Shakespeare in the Park and work for free. And I then decided, unlike you, not to listen to my parents and basically to follow my, low-paying underemployed job. However, I tend to make all these connections constantly between what I do now, which is build shows, which involve the same processes of architecture. I'm wondering, Kenneth, do you see parallels in your work as a dentist, not just the fact that you have clients, which is very interesting, but in the actual work that you do and your craft, and how does it apply to your work as an art collector and curator?
I do, and it may be very funny to hear it, but there's a big creative component, obviously, to dentistry. I love cosmetic dentistry, smile design. You have to have a lot of knowledge around human anatomy, but also something that you can't be taught in dental school, which is kind of, this sense of proportion, light, color theory, things like that sort of, come naturally to people who I think love the arts and appreciate the arts. It was a much easier time in dental school for me with all of that part. I had a much harder part with the hard science and the math and the, probability and all those kind of things. That was harder. I'm not a natural math person, but I'm definitely natural when it comes to arts. And I think it's been, I also think at this point it's an essential thing for dentistry, and they don't focus enough in the admissions process on people who come from the arts.
STEAM. You've probably heard of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. What about STEAM? That's when you add the A for arts. Not just cultural works like dance, drama, music, or visual arts, but also languages and the humanities, philosophy, history, mythology, ethics. STEAM isn't a new concept. 500 years ago, the idea of the Renaissance man was powered by steam. The gap between art and science was bridged, and it led to world-changing innovation. Today, though, STEM-focused education is about learning skills to succeed in a globalized, tech-driven economy. Fine, but without the arts, you have little perspective. You learn how, but not why. You also miss out on notions of beauty, proportion, harmony, and humor, which should be essential learning for everyone, including dentists. The question that comes from that, obviously, is, Emilie, do you get your teeth seen by Dr. Kenneth Montague?
Kenneth is not my dentist. What's really funny is that obviously when I started, he was like, because I had just moved back to Toronto, and he's like, come to the practice. At this point, I was not a huge fan of dentists.
I don't take it personally.
Okay, to be fair, who is really? No one, really looks forward to their dentist appointment. I will say,
what's funny is that, so then at this point, so my family goes to Kenneth's clinic, and I recently started, but I am seeing someone else.
It's a little weird. You're talking about art.
It would be weird. It would be so weird. But I will say, I love going to the dentist now.
Oh, you do now? Okay.
I do. I mean, it also, what's great about word of mouth, which is the dental practice, is that, there are artworks from the collection that are on the walls. So I like to, be able to see also the work that I do in organizing the collection. And also just like the vibes are great. It's actually, there's always good music playing and everyone is just so sweet. So the environment is very inviting, and I actually enjoy getting my teeth cleaned. So
there.
Kenneth, I read a story about how you came to be an art collector. And from what I gather from the story, it hinges on a young boy from Windsor crossing this gap, literally the Detroit River that borders our two countries. Can you share some of that story with us? Because I know it might involve a little bit of baseball and a little bit of music too.
Okay. As a kid, my mom would take the three of us, my older brother and sister and I, over to Detroit on weekends because my father was doing graduate work in industrial arts, actually. He was a shop teacher. And, we just loved going to the Detroit Public Library and the Detroit Institute of Arts. And it was just like a kind of a routine. So on top of going to a baseball game to see the Detroit Tigers or, going to some other type of event, we also had as much exposure to the arts, which was a thrill as a kid. I remember actually very vividly as a 10-year-old seeing that Diego Rivera mural in the Detroit Institute of Arts and seeing a photograph by the Harlem Renaissance photographer James Vanderzee with a couple with raccoon coats. And it was this beautiful image in Harlem with this couple in their fur coats and the car with the white wall tires. And it was just very aspirational for a 10-year-old Black kid from Windsor that had not seen African Americans depicted that way in any kind of media when I was growing up.
So kind of sidestepping from that, I read that a lot of art by African Americans is being snapped up by white collectors in the US. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you can weigh on this idea from your curatorial perspective.
I think, obviously there's that conversation between appreciation, appropriation, and the difficulty that comes with, this transactional practice as well, I think is really important to flag. It's one thing for a white collector to approach a Black artist and collect their work. I think, right now, especially a lot of Black artists are having their moment and are, in mainstream contemporary art conversations. So of course, when you're thinking from, a financial investment perspective, of course, it's a good move, but, are you still going to be practicing the same levels of care to the art? Is it just for that monetary gain long term? And I think, obviously, I've been working with Kenneth for years now, and just knowing how important it is for the artists to also know that their work is going into good hands.
Right. So it's less about you had mentioned appreciation versus appropriation. Yeah. You mentioned transactions. So it's less about the performative aspects of I'm doing this and more about what it means. And as a millennial, we hear a lot about meaning, right? Things have to mean something. But I'm sure, Kenneth, you appreciate this as well, right? Like, why are people collecting and what is the purpose of that? What meaning does it have for them and for the artist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm personally on a mission as a Black collector to push for more Black collectors. I feel like an island. I go to these Venice Biennales and Art Basel Miamis and these great kind of forums and conferences of, the art world. And, over this 25 years of collecting, I've literally been the only one until maybe the last, decade. Increasingly, I'll see one or two or three other Black folks that are collecting. And it's sort of really ramping up in this last year or two, which is thrilling to me. And I kind of really see myself as, a kind of a pioneer that way. I'm really trying to, as my late father would say, lift as we rise. As you do well, you bring up others in your community. I mean, I feel like that's the ethos that drives my collecting. I'm not going to have fun just doing this alone. And there is something special about keeping something for yourself as a Black individual in terms of, the relationship with the artist and building on your collection, like one art object speaking to another. I think it's a little different, the perspective when the collection is in the context of, a Black owner. It's really something that is different for the art world and something that I think is clearly different for the artists.
Lift as you rise. It's a common saying in many African communities, meaning you don't have to wait until you're a president, king, or CEO before helping others. Makes me think of John F. Kennedy's, "A rising tide lifts all boats." The first lift is about making a voluntary effort, whereas the second is about a lift that just happens naturally. In the 1980s, the rising tide phrase became Wall Street wisdom, where unrestricted free markets promised that individual wealth would naturally trickle down to the masses and benefit everyone. Yeah, but when there's a crash like in 2008, it's the small boats that get wrecked first. I prefer Lift as You Rise because it focuses on our individual choices and encourages big picture generosity, compassion, and mentorship. Do you collect as well, Emilie? Are you starting to have your own?
Yeah, I'm starting. But that's the thing, you start where it can work, whether it's, with a print, which are usually, less expensive, but, knowing that I have these pieces that I get to live with also is really special and such a privilege. So I'm starting. Yes.
Yay. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit to ideas of intersectionality, which I know, Emilie, I believe you studied, was part of your training, and identity. In our extended family, we have many discussions around this Canadian flag, what it represents, who's waving it, when they're waving it, what are they saying, for what reason. And it reminds me of that photo by Van Lee Burke of the Birmingham boy in 1970, right, with the Union Jack on your bike. It was in that article, the Globe article that that Kay Taylor did on you, Kenneth. And it also says that you had your own bike with a Canadian flag on it. And I'm wondering, if you were a boy living now in 2022, would you put a Canadian flag on your bike?
It's a very good question. No one's ever asked that. It's a great question. And I have to say that I would not, and not because I don't love my country, but it's all about meanings. And that flag has been co-opted by, a group of people who I really don't see eye to eye with in terms of their vision for Canada. For me, as a Black Canadian, I mean, I think it's a very exclusionary view of being Canadian, and I'm all about inclusiveness. I feel like the way forward for our country is, to be celebrating difference increasingly as the country evolves, rather than, isolating, separating, and in the case of a lot of the people who are doing the flag waving today, it's literally, you go back to where you came from. This is our country. This strange sense of skewed nationalism. So yeah, the flag has a different meaning, which is unfortunate. And I think that, we need to reclaim the flag in some ways. Yeah, it's kind of lost for me these days.
Emilie, how do you feel about this idea of identity, and some people saying that Canada is one thing as opposed to the pluralism that Kenneth is talking about? And to me, that is part of what makes intersectionality so interesting is not the things in themselves, but in the merging of these things and how they cross-pollinate.
For me, growing up, especially, so I'm of mixed heritage, but so my mother's Jamaican, and her family immigrated here in 1980. My father is born and raised in Lebanon, and he moved here after meeting my mom. And so I was born here. My household was never more one than the other. It was very much just, living as a young mixed Canadian kid. But what was interesting is that, as I mentioned, I also grew up in the States, and it's, when I'm outside of the context of Canada, it was something that I held with pride because, I was the Canadian girl at this international school. However, in the context of being in Canada, I feel more pride in saying I'm Jamaican and Lebanese. So, it does bring up a lot, especially when in the conversation of, national identity and individual identity and yeah.
Right. And they always shift, right? I guess some people are so locked into this thing that we are one thing, and we need to find our true one thing, and we need to find our true one partner. And I guess I've just never quite bought into that. I think everything shifts. And Kenneth, I have a question related to shifting identities. I'm a performer and a wannabe cultural historian. Shifting identity is always there in my head, but I wonder how you feel that Black identity may have shifted in the time in which you started Wedge to today.
Another great question. I feel like being in the center of this, I've certainly felt the difference in terms of how people choose to protest, how we choose to resist. I mean, I'm of a generation that, again, grew up right across from Detroit, Michigan, where there was, Black Power movements when I was a kid. That was really, evident in the music and the movies, blaxploitation movies that were happening, like Shaft, and they were all rooted in a certain kind of aesthetic and a politic that was happening at the time about, having agency and like, we are going to tell our own stories. And it really kind of faded out over, most of my adult life. It became kind of almost a cliche or commonplace, or it just didn't have that kind of vitality that it did when I was a kid, until the last few years, when certainly this rise of Black Lives Matter has brought it right back, which is to say that it never was gone, but there's a certain urgency that is here now. We need to put politics first and need to claim space for ourselves. And I'm totally down with that, because it's something that's familiar to me from my youth. It's an interesting cycle how things have gone back to having to state that Black Lives Matter. It kind of became almost like, oh, of course. And at this point, I think, especially as young people, I watch young Black people, it's like no one takes it for granted. It's like we need to state this and be very clear about why Black Lives Matter. And that reminds me of my youth. It's a cycle.
Black Lives Matter. The hashtag started spreading a decade ago when George Zimmerman was acquitted in the 2012 shooting of Trayvon Martin, and again in 2014 after the deaths of Michael Brown and Eric Garner. But the movement didn't come out of nowhere. One of the story threads of my Boom trilogy is the intersection of rights movements over the last 75 years. Civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, indigenous rights. The arc of history does seem to be bending towards justice, but it's cyclical. Whether it's the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, or the beating of Rodney King in 1991, or the murder of George Floyd in 2020, every generation has a wake-up call to racial injustice and inequity. And it's up to all of us, including artists, to help tell the story. Emilie, do you agree with that art, people who dismiss it as something that's frivolous, has a transformative effect on how people think about really big issues like Black Lives Matter? Absolutely.
I find it more approachable. I mean, think about how much time we spend and how much energy and emotion we give to films, and being able to absorb the information that's, shared with us. However, I think there's what is easy to dismiss is that in the context of a movie or a film, these are individuals that are acting and not necessarily being themselves. And when it comes to the visual art world, whether it's, no matter what medium you're using, you are looking at a direct, representation of the artist and their craft and their, the way that they're telling very real and authentic stories. I don't know. I think once we kind of break down that wall and allow ourselves to take in, what's being shared in front of us, that's when we can, have these conversations and allow ourselves to tap into what's being shared, right?
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I'm going to pull off the idea of sharing, and you mentioned movies as well, because, something relatively big in pop culture had just happened recently and at the Oscars last weekend. I wonder what you were thinking. Maybe start with you, Kenneth, when you heard or saw that slap Will Smith to Chris Rock.
Yeah, strange. It's very personal for me. Strangely, I'm actually related to Jada through marriage. My cousin married her auntie.
Come on.
Yeah, he's a retired gynecologist in Baltimore, Maryland. So I remember a young Jada, years ago. So, I can say that, the joke was out of order, but it's a comedian and you're a celebrity and you have to be, I think at that point, used to these kind of stings and barbs, however inappropriate. Mm-hmm. No one else, gets their moment. No one else thinks about anything else with the Oscars this year. Poor Questlove had his moment right afterward, and nobody was thinking about What about all the other artists? Yeah. The other people in the movie, the Serena and Venus, it's just, I feel very sort of disappointed about the whole thing because of all of those reasons.
Me too. I like Will Smith and actually Chris Rock. I find him appealing sometimes too. But I agree with you, Emilie. I wonder from perspective of a woman, of a younger person, what did you think when you saw that? What people are calling this toxic masculinity?
I mean, anytime something like this happens in popular culture, I think my reaction comes in different waves. I think, in the moment, as I'm watching this happen live, I was sitting with my parents and we're both like, the three of us were just like, did that just happen? What was that? And the main reaction afterwards was because of the fact that Chris Rock was making fun of a medical condition, which I hadn't known. I didn't know. So then I'm like, okay, so if he knew that and he still made the joke, I'm like, that's messed up. It's a medical condition that affects a lot of Black people more than white folks, and especially Black women on top of that. And, to add fuel to the fire, Chris Rock is also the comedian and individual who did a documentary about Black women's hair. So if you add all those things, either he didn't know, but I don't know. It's just a lot to unpack. And it was like,
I feel that now that we've dipped our toe into the vast cesspool of pop culture, we should dive right into the game show. Are you game?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm excited. So the way this works is there's certain questions I'm going to throw to each of you individually and others that are first come, first serve. Whoever wants to blurt out the answer, go ahead.
Okay.
Which brand recently paired up LGBTQ plus icons Elton John and Lil Nas X for their ad campaign?
I know it, but I can't remember it, which one it is. So I'm going to pass that to Emilie. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I see it. I can see the ad.
You can see it, but you don't know what they're selling, which is like a marketer's nightmare.
Isn't it Uber Eats or something?
Ding, ding, ding. You get that. Okay. Kenneth, who's the bad guy in Harry Potter?
Voldemort.
Yes. The name you can't say, but you said it. I asked you to say it. You get a point. Kenneth, what does GOAT stand for?
Greatest of all time.
Ding. If boomers had bell bottoms, millennials had what kind of jeans?
Straight leg.
Emilie, you know what I'm looking for.
Skinny jeans.
Skinny jeans, yes. Kenneth, name a character from the newer Star Wars movies, like the most recent ones.
All right.
Emilie.
I know the actor, Daisy something.
Oh no! Are you thinking of Ray?
Yeah, Ray.
Okay, but you don't get a point for that because I would get a point.
I don't watch Star Wars.
Okay, so I got a couple of name that tunes here. This is open for both of you.
All right.
Okay, so let's see.
The guitar is out.
Yeah, the guitar is out. It always comes out at some point.
Okay, this is exciting.
I don't want to lose. It's good. Anyone?
You know that, Emilie.
Emilie?
Do I know the name of it? No.
Kenneth?
Yeah, it's Knock on Wood.
Yay! Okay, good.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What about this more recent one, maybe for the millennial? 1, 2, 3. My baby don't mess around because you love.
Hey, Outcast.
Oh, yeah. You get a nice big point for that one. Okay. What about this? Na, 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 na. Na, 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 na. Kenneth, tell me who sings that.
That's a Motown song. Which one of the groups?
Wilson?
Wilson Pickett.
Yes! Okay, good. What about this little riff?
Superstition, Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Good, Emilie.
And here's a white copy of this guy by White. Let's see.
Play that funky music, white boy.
And let's see the last one. Left a good job in the city, working for a man every night. Emilie?
Proud Mary.
Yeah, Proud Mary. By
Tina Turner.
Tina Turner.
Okay, nice. Tina Turner. Okay. Emilie, which of these musicians did not die in 2016? Leonard Cohen, David Bowie, Bob Dylan, Prince, or George Michael? Who did not die in that year?
George Michael.
Nope. Kenneth?
Bob Dylan's still around.
There you go. Okay,
dear,
good.
I'm
Sorry,
so
that was a complicated question.
I'm so sorry, Bob Dylan.
No, you will redeem yourself as a film buff. Which famous film actor had a character called Tramp? Famous silent movie star.
The biggest silent movie star?
Yeah. I'll give you 3 seconds.
As in Charlie Chaplin?
Yeah, I'll give you that. There you go. Yeah, okay. You were taking a guess, but that's okay. What does it mean when someone says mind your P's and Q's?
Oh, mind your business.
Okay, good. What celestial body was this song about? Bomb ba bomb ba bomb ba bomb bomb ba bomb ba bomb ba dang 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 a dig it on ding.
Pass.
The
Kenneth?
moon, Blue Moon.
Yeah, Blue Moon. Okay. Which iconic 70s rock band wore black and white makeup and platform heels and had a lot of
Kiss.
fire on stage? Kiss. Good. Elvis Presley shocked America by doing what on TV?
What do you do? Elvis Presley.
I'll give
what
you a
do
visual hint.
Oh, what? The hip thrust or
He
whatever?
was shaking his hips.
Shaking his hips.
Okay.
And America
Oh,
was
That
scandalized.
was groundbreaking. I did not know.
Oh my God! It was enough to. It was almost a Burning Records moment, but it was like
No kidding.
from that
Wow.
moment after he did that on Milton Berle. When he went on Ed Sullivan, they cropped him from the hip up for that very reason.
No way.
See, don't ever say you didn't learn anything on this podcast anymore.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's my new fact of the day.
okay, good. So here are a couple of art questions, very basic, mostly European art, but whatever. I just thought I might as well ask a couple of curators. So this is for both of you. Name the extravagant period of art and architecture that was big in Europe in most of the 17th century. What period is that?
Baroque.
Baroque, correct. Kenneth gets a point. Which of Picasso's famous paintings was inspired by the bombings of civilians during the Spanish War?
That's Guernica.
Yes, good.
Yeah,
Okay. This famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci was used for target practice by Napoleon's soldiers.
Yeah, it's the man. This one.
No.
Oh.
What about you, Kenneth? Any guess?
It wasn't the Mona Lisa, but Leonardo.
The Last Supper of all things.
Supper.
Again,
Really?
not very useful information. Okay, now I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to give you a series of quotes, and you have to tell me if this is Maya Angelou or James Baldwin. Okay? I love them both. I'm a huge fan. So here you go. I'm going to throw this one to you first, Kenneth. Anyone who has ever struggled with poverty knows how extremely expensive it is to be poor. Maya Angelou or James Baldwin?
That's Maya Angelou.
Emilie, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Maya Angelou or James Baldwin?
That's Maya Angelou.
James Baldwin.
Oh my God.
Okay, Kenneth. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Maya or James?
Gosh, it could be either of them.
I know. This is tough.
Yeah.
This is admittedly tough.
Yeah, but I would say that's James Baldwin.
Maya Angelou.
It's Maya, yeah.
Oh, you knew that one. Okay.
I
Okay,
actually
smarty
had that
pants.
one. I had that
I'm going to
one.
throw this one at you then. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. James or Maya?
Maya.
You got it. Ding.
I have to really brush up on my Baldwin and Maya Angelou.
Maya
It's really-
Angelou. I know.
I wanted to thank you both for taking part in this. I hope it wasn't as painful as a root canal, and I hope it was good fun, as much fun for you as it was for me.
It was great. Thank you. We enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, friends, as always, for joining me in this conversation. Thank you to my guests, Kenneth Montague and Emilie Croning. For more info, please check out the links to wedgecuratorialprojects.org, to Kenneth's book, As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic, and to emiliecroning.com. My name is Rick Miller, and I wrote, recorded, and edited this episode with multimedia by my team at Cadoons. For more info about the Boom Trilogy and our many other projects, visit cadoons.com or boomtheshow.com. Thanks also to my partners on this podcast, Leap, an online community where life experience meets innovation, created by CABI, the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. For more info or to become a LEAP member, visit cabi.com/leap. If you're on a podcast player, please follow us, write a review, or tell someone about this or other episodes you might have liked. You can also send any questions, comments, feedback to me at Rick Miller Actor on Twitter or Instagram, or rick@rickmiller.ca by email. And hey, in a polarized world, you have a choice. Build a wall or build a bridge. Build bridges, not walls.
Xing the gap.